Hello everyone and welcome back to another exciting coding tutorial on our channel. Today we are going to dive into the world of CSS grid layout. Specifically, we will explore grid template columns, grid auto rows, grid template areas, and more. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell to stay updated with our latest tutorials. Here is what we'll cover today. Introduction to CSS grid layout, grid template columns and grid auto rows. We'll create custom grid templates with grid template areas. We'll also learn how to position items with grid column start and grid column end. And finally, we'll learn responsive design with CSS grid. Let's begin with a quick overview of CSS grid layout. CSS grid is a two-dimensional layout system that allows us to create rows and columns for our web content. Whether you are building a simple web page or a complex web application, it's a fantastic way to design flexible and responsive layouts. To get started, we'll set up our HTML structure. Open your text editor and create an HTML file. Inside the body, we'll create a div element with a class of container. This will serve as our grid container. With our HTML structure in place, let's move on to creating a basic grid layout using CSS grid. So open up your styles.css file and add the following CSS to define our grid. We have created a grid with 3 equal width columns. We have set the columns to 1 fractional units. Now that we have our grid, let's add some items to it. So going back into our HTML, inside our div with class container, we'll create some div elements with class item. This will be our grid items. So we'll have item 1, 2, and 3. You can create as many as you want. Now, you see that our items are showing up in our browser. So, to make our items more prominent, I'm going to give it some background styling. We give it the background color, let's say aquamarine, and then center the content. I'm also going to put some margin top here. Now these are our items we have created. 3 columns, 1, 2, 3, all of equal width. We can also set the default row height of our items to 100 pixels using the grid auto rows property. So if we come down here and set grid auto rows, then we give it a value of 100 pixels. This is how our items will look like now because we have set the grid auto rows to 100 pixels. So that is the height of our items. Now, let's explore grid template areas. Inside the HTML, let's add these classes for column placement. Now, we can create custom grid templates that define the placement of our items. So let's add the following CSS to our styles.css. We come down here and set the grid template areas. We'll start by specifying the header. Then we have the main, and the sidebar. And then the footer. So what we have done is define a grid template with named areas for the header, the main content, the sidebar, and then the footer. Moving on, let's learn how to position these items precisely using grid column start and grid column end. Now, let's use these CSS styles to position the items. So you see the change we are having here. So because we've specified the grid column start to 1, it starts from column 1 and spans the 4 columns. Then we can set our main also like this. Now our layout is getting nicer. Then for the sidebar, we are going to position it like so. And so it remains in place. It is not going to move. And finally, for our footer, we can specify it like so. And then we have the layout we are looking for. In the same way, we can use a shorthand to specify the position of these elements. Instead of writing grid column start and grid column end, we could specify grid column, and then it takes up the space just like using the grid column start and the grid column end properties. So the same can be done for these other ones. If we clear this, then we put a 3 here, we are getting the same output. Three, 4, and then for the footer we have grid column 1, 4, and we have the layout we desire. So as you reduce or increase the size of your browser window, you'll see that the grid template is adapting equally. That is one nice feature about grid layouts. It adapts to your screen size. CSS Grid also shines when it comes to responsive design. To make our grid responsive on smaller screen devices, we'll have to use media queries. So if we check this here, we see that it is adapting to the size of the screen. But what if we wanted our content to be more visible? If we look at the main and the sidebar, The content has been shrinked to fit into the screen size. So, what will be best is to use media queries. So let's use an example to adjust this our grid to this screen size. So how do we do that? Let's start by clearing this. And then coming in here and removing this as well. So now we can come down here and specify our media queries. We want it to be on max 768 pixels, and then we come down container, and we are going to say grid template columns, setting it to 1FR, and there you have it. We have our items stacked on top of each other, giving it an elegant look on smaller screen devices. In the same way, we can uncomment this code here and then use our grid template areas like so to achieve the desired layout on smaller screen devices. And footer. So this is how our layout will look like. If we comment this, this is going to be what we will get, because we have to specify the width of our items. And so when we do it like this, our items get stacked on each other on small screen devices. And if we go into large screen devices, we are going to get it in this format. And that's a wrap on our CSS grid layout tutorial. You have learned grid template columns, grid auto rows, grid template areas, grid column stats, and grid column end properties. Practice is key, so experiment with different layouts and get creative with your designs. Before we conclude, here are some resources to deepen your knowledge of CSS grid. Thank you for joining us today. If you found this tutorial helpful, please give it a thumbs up, share it with your friends, and don't forget to subscribe for more coding tutorials. Happy coding!